Sarah was laughing when it happened. Her hand was resting on her belly, the morning sun lighting up her face, and she was telling the goats to stop chewing on the rake again. I was halfway through fixing the barn door hinge, squinting into the light, when I heard the crunch of gravel, then a voice that could sour milk. Karen. I didn't even turn around at first. She barked something about unauthorized gatherings and pregnancy livestock violations, which made absolutely no sense. Then, in one breathless moment that snapped the peace in two, Karen marched straight up and kicked my pregnant wife in the side. Sarah gasped. I dropped the wrench. Time froze. Her hands shot to her belly as she stumbled back against the gate. Karen stood there, arms crossed like she'd just done something noble. I don't remember what I said. I only remember the sound of the gate creaking and my own heartbeat roaring like a stampede in my ears. I ran to Sarah, kneeling, eyes scanning her face. She was pale but breathing, blinking hard, trying not to cry. Not for herself. For the baby. I pressed my hand gently to her hip where the kick had landed and whispered her name. She shook her head, telling me not to panic, but her voice was shaking. Behind me, Karen was still talking. Something about how we were violating HOA livestock codes, and she was within her right. Her voice was smug, clipped, the kind of tone you hear from someone who thinks the law is just a suggestion for other people. I turned slowly and looked at her, but I didn't move. Not yet. I walked to the tool bench by the barn. She thought I was going to grab a shovel. What I grabbed was older, quieter, and much more effective. In a wooden box covered in dust and chicken feathers sat my old trooper radio. I hadn't used it in years, but I kept it charged out of habit. Call it muscle memory. I flipped the switch. Static. Then a pop. Then the old familiar voice of dispatch. Unit 4 to base. Emergency on private land. Pregnant woman assaulted. Need backup. A beat of silence. Then, like thunder cracking from heaven itself, the reply. 10-4. Rolling code 3. That you, Cal? Trooper Jalen en route. For minutes. Karen laughed. She thought I was bluffing. She thought I was just some retired rancher playing cowboy. She didn't know the badge I wore wasn't some souvenir. It was earned. She didn't know that the man rolling in was someone I'd once pulled from a burning wreck with my bare hand. She had 4 minutes to find out who she had just kicked in the gut, figuratively and literally. Sarah, seated now on a hay bale in the shade, tried to steady her breathing. I knelt beside her again, holding her hand. She gave me a small smile, brave and soft. She was always like that. The kind of woman who never raised her voice but could calm a storm with a look. Even in pain, even scared, she squeezed my hand and said, "We're okay. It's just Karen. She can't hurt us." I wish that were true. Karen had already hurt us, and she wasn't done. Now that she realized help was coming, Karen doubled down. She whipped out her phone and started filming, narrating like she was some victim in a made-for-TV movie. She panned across the barn, the goats, the hay, then focused on Sarah, claiming she'd been attacked while enforcing HOA code. Her voice trembled in that fake way people use when they're putting on a show. I didn't say a word. Let the camera roll. Let it catch the truth. Let it catch the part where the woman with the clipboard assaulted a pregnant woman over a fence dispute. The neighbors started to arrive. First, Mrs. Dallow from the Lavender Farm, then Pete from 2 plots over, then a couple of teenage boys on dirt bikes who parked and watched from a distance. Karen's voice got louder, trying to play to the crowd. She pointed at Sarah, claiming she had faked the whole thing. That she threw herself against the gate to stage it. That I was an old burnout trying to play sheriff. I stayed kneeling next to my wife, but my ears were on the wind. I could hear the sirens, faint at first, then rising like a slow tidal wave. Karen heard them too. Her face changed. Not fear. Not yet. Confusion, maybe. Doubt. Then came the SUV. Black and white. Lights flashing. It didn't stop at the end of the lane like most cars. It rolled right through the open fence gate, across the gravel, and stopped 10 feet from Karen. Dust swirled. The door opened. Trooper Jalen stepped out. Sunglasses. Broad shoulders. The kind of presence that made people shut up without a word. Karen actually smiled. She took a step toward him like they were long-lost cousins. Said something about being assaulted and needing protection. Jalen looked right past her. Looked at me. Then gave a nod. Captain. Karen blinked. Her smile faltered. I stood up. Jalen walked over to Sarah first. Checked on her. Asked if she needed an ambulance. She said no, not yet, just needed to sit. Then he turned to Karen. Can you explain what happened here? Karen opened her mouth, but Jalen raised a hand. No, ma'am. I asked him. I laid it out, plain and clean. No fluff. Just the facts. Sarah. The gate. The kick. The footage. The witnesses. The badge I once carried. The boundaries of our land, miles from any HOA jurisdiction. Karen interrupted halfway through. Jalen shut her down. Ma'am, please step back. This is now a criminal investigation. That was the first time Karen's face showed real fear. Not because she was sorry, but because for the first time in her HOA-fueled reign of terror, someone wasn't afraid of her clipboard or her threats. Jalen asked for my documentation. I pointed to the folder in the barn office. Karen tried to block the path. Jalen stepped in between and gently moved her aside like she was a confused tourist trying to find the bathroom. It was beautiful. Sarah exhaled, finally relaxing. I knelt back beside her. She looked at me and said, I think the baby kicked. I smiled. So did Justice. And it had steel-toed boots. And Karen? She had about 3 more minutes of freedom left. Karen stood in the middle of our gravel driveway with her arms crossed like a school principal ready to hand out detentions. Only she had no authority here and certainly no rules that applied beyond her HOA borders. The sirens had faded, but the weight they left behind was still thick in the air. Trooper Jalen had already radioed for backup, not because he needed it, but because a situation like this called for documentation, for presence, and for clarity. Karen wasn't just some annoying neighbor now. She had assaulted a pregnant woman, trespassed onto private land, and was still digging herself deeper with every word she said. Sarah sat quietly on the shaded bench, sipping cool water. Her breathing was steadier now, and a soft pink had returned to her cheeks. I stayed close by, my arm resting on the back of the bench, just in case she needed anything. Sarah wasn't the kind of person to complain, not even when she was hurting, and that was part of what made this whole thing so infuriating. She wasn't just my wife. She was the kind of person you felt lucky to be near. Calm in chaos, gentle with every word. And Karen had walked onto our land and kicked her as if we were props in her power game. Karen was trying her best to reclaim control. She waved her phone at Jalen and shouted something about unlawful detainment. That made one of the younger troopers chuckle under his breath. Karen caught it and turned her rage toward him, demanding badge numbers, badge names, even claiming she was part of a state HOA compliance committee. Jalen remained unreadable. He had the patience of a man who had written more reports than he'd had hot meals, and it served him well. He nodded along, taking notes, his pen moving slowly as Karen ranted. Then she tried something new. She started listing every HOA code she could remember, reading from a crumpled laminated sheet she kept in her oversized purse. She accused us of livestock noise violations, unapproved fencing height, unauthorized agricultural structures, and even improper dirt color. Dirt color. She said the dust from our driveway didn't match the aesthetic tone permitted by the HOA's natural palette guidelines. I stared at her, wondering if she'd practiced these lines in front of a mirror or if this delusion came naturally. Jalen asked a simple question. Ma'am, where does the HOA property boundary end? Karen pointed vaguely toward the mailbox. Jalen pulled out a printed parcel map and handed it to her. It clearly showed our land, our boundaries, and a large highlighted zone labeled non-HOA agricultural exempt. He let her stare at it for a moment, then gently asked again. Are you aware this property does not fall under HOA jurisdiction? Karen didn't answer. She turned red. Her eyes flitted between the map and the goats and then to the growing group of onlookers across the road. Our neighbors had started gathering in small clusters. Some leaned on fence posts, others had folding chairs. Pete from 2 doors down brought popcorn. Literally. He shook the bag and offered it to Mrs. Dallow, who was filming from her porch. I overheard her whispering to someone on speakerphone that Karen had finally snapped. It was a small town. News traveled fast, and when Karen was involved, people showed up. She had spent the past 2 years treating our area like her personal chessboard, slapping fines on people for unmowed grass or garden gnomes or flags that weren't aesthetically compliant. People were tired of her. And now they were watching the fall. Karen must have felt the shift in energy because she changed tactics again. She tried to cry. She pulled out tissues and told Jalen that she had only tried to stop a violent dog from attacking her. We didn't have a dog. Then she said Sarah had threatened her first. Sarah hadn't said more than 10 words to her. Then she said she had been invited onto the property to conduct an inspection. Jalen asked who had invited her. She pointed at me. I raised an eyebrow. Jalen didn't even write that part down. He just kept the same patient expression like a schoolteacher waiting for a child to admit they broke the window. I excused myself for a moment to fetch the manila folder from the barn office. It was thick and dusty but well organized. Inside were property deeds, a copy of the county zoning exemption, and even a signed letter from a judge confirming we were outside of all HOA oversight. I handed it to Jalen, who flipped through it quickly and nodded. Then he turned to Karen. "Ma'am, you are currently on private property without permission, and based on the witness statements and physical evidence, you are being cited for trespassing and assault." Karen's voice cracked. She tried to argue, but it came out as a strained whisper. "You don't understand. I'm on the board. I'm the only thing keeping this place civilized. If I don't enforce order, who will?" Jalen didn't flinch. He handed her a citation slip and told her she had the right to contest it in court. Then he informed her that if she didn't leave immediately, she'd be detained. Karen's eyes scanned the crowd again. No sympathy. Not anymore. Just folding arms, quiet stares, and a few smirks. The goats bleated from behind the fence like they were part of the jury. She turned back to Jalen and asked, "Is this really how this town works? You let animals and retirees run the place?" Jalen replied without emotion. "No, ma'am. We let the law run it." Karen finally backed away, muttering threats about lawsuits and appeals. She promised she'd be back with a lawyer, a news crew, maybe even a private investigator. Jalen simply said, "We'll be here." And he turned his attention back to Sarah, asking if she'd like a ride to the hospital for a checkup. Sarah shook her head and thanked him softly. I stood next to her, proud and protective. Karen crossed the property line, still looking back every few steps like someone leaving a crime scene who hadn't quite accepted it yet. Once she was out of sight, the troopers relaxed a little. The younger one took off his sunglasses and whistled low. "That woman's a one-person lawsuit generator." Jalen chuckled and said, "That wasn't a citizen complaint. That was a demolition attempt." The radio crackled again. More backup was arriving just in case. Sarah leaned her head against my shoulder. Her breathing was steady. Her hand rested on her belly again. The baby kicked. I looked around. The barn, the trees, the sky turning gold. This was our land. And now, finally, the law had drawn the line where the fence did. The Karen storm had passed, for now. But we all knew she wasn't done. Not yet. The air hung thick with the kind of tension that doesn't leave easily. Karen might have stomped off the property, but her presence still lingered like the smell of burnt plastic. Sarah sat quietly, her hands still resting on her belly, her eyes half closed. I had fetched a damp cloth from the house and gently placed it behind her neck to help cool her down. The goats had long wandered to the far end of the pen, sensing the chaos was over, and even the chickens were quiet, pecking near the feed bins without their usual squawking. But I knew better. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of whatever Karen had planned next. Trooper Jalen stood near